We didn't fight because we wanted to die. We fought because we wanted to live free. In the thick jungles of Southeast Asia, where the heat suffocated like a wet blanket and the air smelled of gunpowder and fear, an army was rising, silent, unseen, and underestimated. Among its ranks were not just men hardened by years of conflict, but women, daughters, mothers, and farmers who traded their sandals for rifles and their innocence for survival. This is the story of the Viet Cong's female warriors. Women who crawled through mud-filled tunnels, carried explosives under their clothes, and faced death without hesitation. They were called Guerilla Beauties. But beneath that name was a force far deadlier than beauty itself. By 1965, the Vietnam War had transformed from a local insurgency into a full-scale nightmare. The U.S. military dropped more bombs on Vietnam than on all of Europe during World War II. Villages vanished under napalm. Rice fields became graves, and yet the Viet Cong endured. American commanders were baffled. How could poorly equipped guerrillas resist the most powerful army in the world? What they didn't realize was that half of the Viet Cong OS strength was even male. Nearly 1 in 3 Viet Cong fighters were women. They worked as medics, spies, snipers, and couriers. They fought in the shadows, moving like ghosts through the dense jungle. And when captured, they smiled, because fear had no place in their revolution. To understand these women, we must go back, before the war, before the bombs. In the 1950s, Vietnam was divided north and south. Families torn apart, ideals split in two. In small rural villages, women carried the weight of survival, planting rice, raising children, caring for wounded veterans from the French War. But as the U.S. presence grew in the South, so did the call for resistance. And from that call, the long-haired army was born, a term that would soon strike fear into the hearts of American soldiers. They were led by Madame Nguyen Thi Dinh, a woman whose voice carried more authority than most generals. Her rallying cry was simple: women can fight as fiercely as men, perhaps fiercer, because we fight for the lives we bring into this world. And so, the women of Vietnam answered. They joined the revolution not as victims, but as equals. In the Mekong Delta, a group of young women crawled through muddy trenches, carrying rifles that were often older than their fathers. They practiced ambush tactics, learned to assemble traps, and memorized the terrain like the lines on their palms. Many of them were teenagers, girls who had never left their villages. Their training was brutal, no comfort, no food beyond a handful of rice, no guarantee of seeing the next sunrise. But what kept them going wasn't glory, it was vengeance. For brothers lost, homes burned, and the endless hum of foreign helicopters above their sky. One of them, Le Thi Xuan, would later recall in an interview, "We were small, yes, but the Americans never suspected that the girl selling bananas by the road had a grenade hidden under her basket." The Viet Cong's female fighters became experts in deception. They were invisible among civilians, blending perfectly into their surroundings. Some worked as waitresses at U.S. bases, serving coffee in the morning, planting explosives at night. Others joined village welcoming parties, smiling, waving flags, only to lead enemy patrols into ambush zones. A captured American officer once wrote, "You never knew who was your friend and who was your enemy. A 12-year-old girl could blow up your convoy. A grandmother could poison your food." These were not isolated cases. This was psychological warfare, executed with precision and patience. Courage had a price, and for many, it was their lives. In 1968, during the Tet Offensive, hundreds of female fighters took part in the attacks across South Vietnam. Many were killed before they reached their targets. Some were captured, tortured, or executed on sight. But even in captivity, their resolve remained unbroken. An American intelligence report from 1969 described the interrogation of a 20-year-old guerrilla named Tran Thi Giao. Despite repeated questioning, the subject remained defiant. She expressed pride in her role and refused to identify her unit. When asked why she fought, she replied simply, "Because I have nothing left to lose except my country." Beneath the ground of Cu Chi lay a hidden world, a labyrinth stretching more than 200 kilometers. In these suffocating tunnels, women worked tirelessly. They cooked, treated wounds, stored weapons, and crawled through passages narrower than their shoulders. They were nicknamed the Tunnel Queens, American Tunnel Rats. Soldiers tasked with entering and clearing these underground networks would later describe them as invisible phantoms. One veteran recalled, "You'd crawl in, flashlight shaking, and suddenly hear a whisper, a woman-ass voice right before a grenade rolled at your feet." The Cu Chi tunnels became a living organism, and women were its heartbeat. For all their strength, these women were still human. They loved, they laughed, they dreamed of peace. Many wrote letters to lovers who never returned. Some married fellow fighters in the jungle, ceremonies held under moonlight, surrounded by the sounds of war. One fighter, Vam Thi Han, wrote in her diary, "We promised to survive the war and build a new home." He died 2 weeks later. I buried him under a banana tree and went back to my post. Their love stories rarely ended in happiness, but in every loss they found renewed purpose, a reason to keep fighting. American soldiers were often torn between awe and terror when facing these women. They were not just enemies, they were enigmas. Private Thomas R. Henderson of the 25th Infantry Division wrote in his diary, "We raided a village today. The women stared at us with eyes that didn't blink. One of them smiled. I think she knew something we didn't. For the Americans, Vietnam was hell, but for the women of the Viet Cong, it was home, and they defended it with every breath." When the war ended in 1975, many of these women returned to their villages, scarred, forgotten, and silent. They had fought like soldiers, but history rarely remembered them as such. While men received medals and parades, women went back to tending fields, carrying memories heavier than any weapon. And yet, without them, the revolution might never have survived. Their courage turned the impossible into victory. Today, in the small villages of southern Vietnam, you can still find them, old women with soft smiles, their hands trembling as they pour tea for visitors. Ask them about the war, and they'll often laugh. Ask them if they were afraid, and they'll shake their heads. Because they weren't just soldiers. They were the soul of a nation. "We were not born to destroy," one of them said. "We were born to protect what was ours, and if that meant fighting, then we fought." They were the Guerilla Beauties, warriors without uniforms, mothers without mercy, women who fought in the shadows and changed the course of history.